computer.
There we go. Good morning, everybody. Wow, we got a nice group here. And looks like we've got about 32 people here this morning. There's going to be more coming in. Good morning to you all. I'm Jim Cressman. I'm going to be hosting the meeting this morning, and our guest speaker is Kerry Baker. Kerry has helped a couple of us go through the ordeal of the appeals process in getting our connection to getting our service connection for inclusion body myositis. And I've got a fly joining us here. So we're going to introduce Kerry. Kerry, why don't you go ahead and give us a little bit of a background on what you have been doing, and then we will let you introduce the programs and so on. Let's get everybody muted here. Yeah, we're picking up some background noise here. There we go. All right.
As fast as I can.
Yeah, thank you. Kerry, good morning and welcome.
Good morning, everyone. I really appreciate you guys giving me the opportunity to speak with you today. I know this topic is of the utmost importance to all of you, and so I completely understand that. And so I just want you to know it's my honor to be able to talk to all you guys today. So a little bit about me. I served in the Marines from '87 to '98. Kind of all over the place in the Marines. I was a helicopter crew chief for most of that time, and got out in '98. And in that same year, I started representing veterans. I think my bio on the site said I started in 2005. I was with DAV in 2005, but I actually started with them in '98, same year I got out of service. And by 2005, though, I was practicing at their Judicial Appeals Office in DC at their headquarters, handling cases in the Court of Appeals for Veterans Claims. And so that was a wealth of experience. After that, I was their Assistant National Legislative Director for a little while. I testified on the Hill numerous times on legislation and presented legislation and just did all kinds of legislative things when it comes to benefits. My whole career has been on benefits, the Veterans Benefits Administration, mostly compensation and pension cases, some other stuff, but so I'm not a healthcare expert by no stretch of the means, but I am pretty good benefits expert. So somewhere around 2008 ish, I left DAV, and because I was approached by VA and sort of offered a position as their policy chief in compensation service in central office, which was a really good opportunity. So I took that, and for about the next 4 years or so, I was the policy chief in compensation service. And my areas of, I think technically the title was legislation and policy. That was my staff, and that's made up the policy staff in compensation service, who governs all policy, at least back then. They did. They have various arms. There's a regulation arms, there's a judicial review arm. The driver was legislation and policy. So everything coming from the Hill to the Hill, and then anything dealing with policy on disability claims. So I worked a lot with herbicide related claims and burn pit exposures. I was one of the original kind of authors of the whole burn pit debacle that led to the PACT Act here recently. I started all that about 2007 before VA had heard of burn pits, and stuck with them for the 15 years after that. And now we have the PACT Act. So I was pretty proud of that kind of big weight off my shoulders, to be honest. When all that,
As you should be, and thank you.
and so that was, you're welcome. So the time in the VA was probably the most educational to me, because I got to see how the sausage was made, and made quite a few of it myself, and I realized at that point, not a lot of people on the outside, including VSOs, really know what goes on inside that world, even though some of them might believe that they do. But it wasn't long after that, I had to get back to Kentucky, or close to Kentucky, to be near my mother. So there was a position open up in the Nashville STAR staff, which stands for Systemic Technical Accuracy Review. It's their national quality assurance team, whose job is to review cases for errors that are done in the field. They had never had anybody that checked their work. So the STAR reviewer, so to speak, is the end of the line on quality reviews, so to speak. But there had been no checker of the checkers, if you will. And so they had created that position, and really didn't have anybody to fill it. Of course, STAR's main goal was to follow policy. So I was just a good shoe-in for that position. So that was my last year in VA. And at which point, a law firm, Chisholm and Kilpatrick, approached me, and then I was already friends with many people in this firm. But they offered me a position in the private sector. I was already thinking about going to the private sector, and so I did. It turned out really, really well, and I was there up until from about 2012-ish. So just a few years ago, around 2019-ish, working as their claim strategy supervisor. I did a lot of work with those guys. Ended up starting my own practice under Warrior Advocacy, which I have now. At the same time, I started working with Hill and Ponton. And I do by far, most of my work now with Hill and Ponton. I'm not technically taking cases under Warrior Advocacy, because it's just me. So I'm my own IT guy, and my own HR guy, and my own secretary, and all that. So I'm transitioning my work with my cases over to Hill and Ponton. And at some point in the future, I will just be a Hill and Ponton employee. The Warrior Advocacy will still be alive. In fact, we may even merge those two with Hill and Ponton, but that's all, of no concern here. But so that experience has given me a wealth in all areas of VA benefits, both from the VSO side, internally in VA, at the private sector side, arguing cases at the Board of Veterans Appeals, in the court, and obviously at the local level. So I'm fairly confident in my ability in this business. And it's a complicated one. VA has done some things, just in the past 5 years that I really disagree with. It made things harder, in my opinion. A few good things have come out of it, but not many. So, but that's part of my background. When it comes to exposures, somehow I've gotten the reputation of the harder the case. If it's a very hard case, call me. I'm not sure that's deserved, but I am pretty good with exposure cases. These are sort of exposure cases. Where I'll get to more of that later, but in a way they're not, but in a way they are. We use exposures in any way that it can help us with these cases. So that's my background. And I'll turn it back over to Jim, and he wants to lead into something else. I'll be glad to accommodate whatever you guys want.
Kerry, thank you very much. You've got a very extensive background and diverse background, and we're we're going to now make you an honorary IBM patient here for us.
Okay.
And it's much better than being the real thing, but honorary is good enough.
Okay.
Kerry, we have struggled for so many years. When we put a claim in for disability benefits, it is, for all intents and purposes, rubber stamped, denied. And the posture that we are taking on this is due to the similarities and the parallels between ALS, or Lou Gehrig's disease, and inclusion body myositis. Clinically, right, medically, they are so very closely linked. And because ALS is covered under Title 38 law that says that if it is the only law that I have ever come upon that is one sentence long and just basically says, if you get ALS at any time after military service, it was caused by military service. There was no criteria about where you served, when you served, what you were exposed to. And due to the similarities between ALS and IBM, we're trying to attach IBM and get Title 38 amended to include that. The Board of Appeals has repeatedly come back and said denied because of your claim that this is ALS. Well, ALS is rightfully it's specified specifically in Title 38, but because there is an omission of IBM, they say no. You can't make that claim. But right, the science has shown otherwise. Yeah. How does it evolve through the appeals process, where you have been successful in getting service connected for IBM, where we as laymen, if you will, on our own, have been repeatedly denied? What is the difference?
I can't say it comes down to something as simple as a mathematical equation. Some of it could have been luck. I'm just going to put that out there. When I my first case of IBM, I'll be honest, I looked at it and I thought, man, this is tough. I don't know if I can win this. And, I'm just being honest, looking at it.
Yeah, please.
With the links to service and the premise that it was put forth in VA, if this goes to the board just in the fashion that, well, it's like ALS, therefore it should be service connected like ALS. Everything in me said that's not going to fly, because it doesn't give the board so this is a compelling type of case. Most board judges, not all of them, are going to look at something like this and go, I'd like to grant this benefit. Most, not all. There's some bad ones out there, but even the ones that want to do that are going to have a problem on that theory alone. I say alone because it doesn't give them a hook, so to speak, in layman terms, for service connection. It gives a theory that there's a similar disease and it's presumptive. Why not make this disease presumptive? But it still doesn't give a hook when you think about what's required for service connection. An in-service event, a diagnosis and a medical link between the two. So it's the event that's troubling here, because you're right, with ALS, the unique thing about that, and you're right, it's the only thing like this in the system. The event is service itself. And so I've argued this in a couple of these cases to an extent, that the event is service itself here. All right, just like in ALS, the event is service itself. But my fear in using that alone is that's not enough for a board judge, and let's face it, I think the board judges are about the only people granting these. So I'll just, there might be some granted at the local level. So a board judge, can't go outside of the law. They are bound by VA regulations, general counsel opinions, precedent court decisions, statutes, all of that. There are a lot of things they're not bound by. VA's internal policies. Okay, they're not bound by those, and some other things like that. But there are a huge set of rules that bind the board, and and I made plenty of arguments in various types of cases. Going after a subject that I knew the board wasn't going to be able to grant, and I knew we were going to litigate it. And some of those things turned out rather good in the long run, because we were going to change some areas of law. The board can't change those. They don't have the authority. They have the authority to look at the case in front of them, apply the law to the facts of that case, and see where it comes out. So knowing that, it's important to try to find something else in addition to just the argument that it's like ALS, therefore it should be service connected like ALS. And I'm not saying that argument will not win some benefits, because I think it has already. My bigger concern is it's going to run into a judge that it's not going to work on eventually. And as all of you, most of you have probably experienced already, that's happened already. I haven't personally experienced it. So what I try to do a little differently is find any kind of exposure to try to link the ALS to just get to the relative equipoise standard of evidence, which is the benefit of the doubt standard. That when it comes to the standard of proof for service connection, a lot of you may already know the standard is the benefit of the doubt. So we just need to raise enough question that looking at the favorable and unfavorable evidence, that it's balanced. And if that's the case, the veteran should win on benefit of the doubt. Well, we're halfway there with the research that Dr. Is it Lloyd or Coons? I always get his name.
There's Tom Lloyd and Todd Cohen. Two
okay.
Doctors.
They've gotten us halfway there, sort of, with their argument that this should be service connected, just like and for the same reasons ALS is. Trying to find something else to link it to, some type of exposure, even if it's a ubiquitous exposure, can be enough, I think, in a lot of cases, to give that judge that hook that he or she needs to go ahead and concede an in-service event. Whereas they might agree with the overall premise that maybe this should be service connected like ALS, but knowing that they don't have the authority to override the regulation on any given case and grant it, just try to give them something in addition to what they already have in there. Now, sometimes that's easier said than done. A Vietnam vet, it can be relatively simple because they're presumed exposed to Agent Orange. And so that's something that we could bring to bear in just about any Vietnam vet's case. There's a lot of other types of MOS related exposures, location related exposures, depending on where somebody served. But that's one of the things we try to do, is try to add something to the already well-developed premise as to why we're arguing it should be service connected in the first place. But now let me get to ALS. And a lot of people you may or may not know this, and that's why I want to cover it. A lot of people think Congress made ALS presumptive. They did not. Okay. VA has regulatory rulemaking authority in their own right to create regulations out of whole cloth when they have the evidence and the backing and the political motivation and all that to do so. With ALS, they were initially looking at Gulf War cases and trying to figure out, there was a pattern emerging that brain scans in Gulf War vets were showing atrophy of the brain in different areas. And I remember when that was first being looked at, we got some cases service connected for that very thing. And it was one of those odd findings that, what's happening to these guys? Why is this there? And so that started getting looked at. What it turned into was the ALS presumption, because long story short, the IOM started looking at all of this accumulation of studies and evidence, and did their own and come to the conclusion that, a lot of these guys were slowly going from that brain scan to a diagnosis of ALS. And so it was originally thought a Gulf War issue, but when they finally looked at all the numbers, what they realized, it wasn't just Gulf War, and I'm using Gulf War kind of globally. It was veterans of all eras, as long as they had active duty service. Now, you do have to have active duty service for a certain amount of time for the ALS.
I think it was 90 days. Yes.
Yeah. It won't work with inactive duty for service or active duty for training, unfortunately. But they could not identify any particular cause as to why people are getting ALS. But what they could identify was that service members with that length of time on active duty as a whole were getting ALS at a higher clip than the rest of the civilian population that never served. And so they took it upon themselves, the secretary at the time, using his rulemaking authority, implemented a rule to make ALS presumptive for all veterans. Never been done before, never been done since. The IOM and the preamble to the regulation, you can go back and read all this stuff, and it will explain, that you can read between the lines and realize they do believe it's some form of exposure, but they don't know what. And so when I look at that and I compare it to IBM, what is it that, and I think we kind of sort of used this argument in Larry's case, although I think Larry had one of those rare judges that, really bought into the underlying premise, and that's good. It's really, really good. But, what is it that every service member is exposed to? It's a legitimate question, and there are very few things that every service member is exposed to. The rifle range, gunpowder, things like that, other than just regular physical stress and mental stress. Very few things that you can look at across the board and say just about all service members are exposed to this. That helps us when we try to draw an analogy to IBM. And for that reason, that's one of the reasons I search out any kind of exposure I can get my hands on, and to add that theory of service connection to the already underlying premise of its relationship to ALS.
Kerry, allow me to ask: were you able to review a research report? I don't know if this got into your hands or not, but there was a research study done out of Boston University with a group of PhD scientists that conclusively found that hydrocarbons of many varieties were responsible for increasing the protein that is directly attributed to causing ALS and IBM. Are you familiar with that? The title of it was dioxins and related contaminants increase levels of TDP-43. If that title, does that ring a bell to you at all?
It rings a bell. I don't know that I've seen that. I would very much, if you could send that to me.
Yeah, I will.
In fact, feel free to send me any and all reports you guys have. In fact, there's one I wanted to ask for, and I know somebody sent it to me. Augie, you might have sent it to me, but it's the one that talks about the increase in IBM, just like in ALS, in the general population or in the veteran population
versus the epidemiology report. Yeah.
If somebody could resend that to me too,
Where could I send that to you? I can get those out to you this afternoon.
Okay, my email, I've got two emails. Well, let me give everyone both of them. My Hill and Ponton email is K Baker at hillandponton.com. That's HILLANDPONTON.com. And then my personal email is Kerry, Kerry, .Baker at Comcast.net. And
Okay.
And I should add this too, I'm sure people might be interested. We have decided, Matt Hill and myself have decided to take on ALS as an issue, as a larger issue, sort of a larger goal, if you will. And so, we want to handle these cases. And obviously that's an individual call with everybody on the phone here and all of your other comrades, but if you would like us to handle your case, it is something that we are interested in.
You meant IBM, didn't you, Kerry?
What's that?
You meant IBM, inclusion body myositis, not including ALS, but we all have IBM. So you said you wanted to, I think Matt said he wanted to go after the ALS cases.
Oh, no, IBM. I'm sorry. IBM. Yeah. The ALS cases are easy.
This study, I think you're going to find very helpful for IBM cases because it gives that, as you refer to it, as that hook.
Yeah.
And that hook is exposures. The difficulty has been is this study was done specifically for ALS. It never mentions IBM, but it is the proteins that are identical on this, as proven by other researchers such as Tom Lloyd and Todd Cohen. It is that the proteins are identical, the way the proteins act are identical. The difference between IBM, ALS, frontal lobal dementia is geography.
Yeah.
Everything in the cellular level is identical. So I will send this to you, and I will also send to you the letters that we have just concluded, and they have every member of the House Committee and every member of the Senate Committee on Veterans Affairs has been mailed a copy of this letter. It's a 10-page report that shows all of the research, all of the arguments, all of the statistics, the tables, and basically the request to change Title 38. I will send a copy of that letter and that report to you as well.
Okay, and I would suggest too, the reason I went over the history of ALS, I would send it to the Secretary of VA.
We have, we've been. There's been others that have suggested that, and our emphasis right now has been to get these letters out to the committees, and now that is done. Perhaps we can ask for a little hand-holding and guidance on the best way to approach that.
Sure. Yeah, but I say that simply because the Secretary does have the power to move on their own. They'd probably want more studies and all that stuff, but that way you don't have to rely solely on Congress.
Kerry, let me ask this. You said that the rule, the Secretary has the ability for a rule change, which I've heard before. But how does a rule change work its way into the legislature to get the Title 38 changed? Because what came first, so to speak, the chicken or the egg kind of a thing?
Yeah. Well, now you got to keep in mind, you got Title 38 in the statute, Title 38 in the regulations. 38 U.S. Code, right, is the statutes. Those are all laws written by Congress, and part of those laws, there's one, I think it's called Section 501 in Title 38, gives the Secretary of VA his own or her own rulemaking authority. When I say rulemaking, I'm talking about Title 38 Code of Federal Regulations, the CFR. All right, so that is where the ALS presumptive lives in Title 38 Code of Federal Regulations. The secretary writes regulations. I say the secretary, it's his people that write the regulations.
Of course.
But those are put forth by the agency, regardless of what agency. It could be a DOD reg, it could be a Homeland, whatever. In this case, it's a VA reg. The secretary and their group of leaders within that agency, they're responsible for promulgating regulations, because Congress gave the secretary his own rulemaking authority because they need it to do lots of things that aren't mandated by Congress or aren't prohibited by Congress. There's still things that have to be done downstream of what Congress tells VA to do. Or Congress might make a regulation that's broad in scope and purpose, allowing the agency to fill in gaps. In fact, it's called gap filling. A lot of courts will refer to it as that. And that allows an agency to interpret sort of what Congress meant and carry out their wishes. And the regulation may contain more detail about how to go about doing what Congress said to do. In other words, so how to make, the Congress says make the sausage, but it might not tell VA how to make the sausage. So they go out and figure out their own best way to make the sausage. Kind of what happened with ALS. Congress gave the secretary for example, well, let me give you an example. The schedule for rating for disabilities, right? It's part 4 in Title 38 in the Code of Federal Regulations, right? That's the entire VA rating schedule, right? That rating schedule is not in Title 38 in the U.S. Code, because that's purely an internal VA mission, if you will. They create the rating schedule.
So allow me to interrupt, if I may. Forgive me, but I wanted to make sure that we all understand this. So there's 2 different flavors of Title 38, is what you're telling us here.
Right.
There's the regulations, and then there's the laws. Is that a simplified clip?
Yeah, and I would look at them as all laws, but the statutes are primary, the regulations are secondary. And that's so if Congress does, create a statute in Title 38 in the U.S. Code, then VA has no choice but to follow it. Right? They have to. It's a mandate from Congress. That means it's a mandate from a grateful nation.
Right.
And they have to go out and carry out those wishes. It's just that the secretary can't act on their own in many circumstances. Now there's a process. They're going to have to justify it. They propose a regulation. There's a whole huge process it has to go through the Office of Management and Budget and the VA's General Counsel. And usually when it gets to the OMB, if it's not something Congress mandated, well, OMB is going to have some questions on it. Justify spending this money, justify this, show us the evidence for that. And they may kill it. I've seen them kill a number of regulations, but at the same time, it may be something the president wants, and the OMB is going to let it go right on through. But the point is, it's got a process to go through to become a final regulation. So it's not as simple as just waving a wand, but if they are serious about it, they can do it. And if OMB pushes back, the secretary, if they're serious about it, can stand their ground with OMB. They did it with ALS. They did it with the heart conditions presumptive for Agent Orange vets. And I think for something like this, I would, if the secretary wanted to do this, I would have a hard time seeing somebody stand in their way, because we're not talking about tens of thousands of claims here, like you might be with a lot of other, so relatively speaking, it's still a small number. It's just very, very, very severe disability.
Yeah. And it's going to be, I mean, if you just take a look around the room, if you will, and look at us, we're not in our 20s anymore. We're all in our 60s, 70s, and 80s. And, from a government budgetary standpoint, it's not going to be overwhelming from that standpoint. Um, Kerry, can we open this up to questions from others? If
Absolutely.
anybody have questions, we'll try to field them. It's a little bit of a complicated, I don't have everybody on one screen. We got a good turnout today. So I don't see if your hand is up, but if you do have a question for Kerry, feel free to jump in. Dick, you're right there. Go ahead, please. Unmute yourself. There you go, Dick. Thank you.
Good morning and thank you. A question first for you, Jim. Can you distribute both of those reports to all of us, or perhaps others have seen them? I have not.
I will. I can do that.
Okay. And then Kerry, thank you. And how early in our process should we get you involved? Do you have to wait until we've been declined? Do you look at things earlier? What do you recommend?
Excellent question. Typically, as just a business model, we wait till things get declined because that's when we start our appellate process. We don't have to do that. Okay, that's just basically in your average case, what happens out there, because you don't really want to have to hire a law firm if you can get the benefit granted on your own, which I agree with. But on these cases, we've decided to, take them at whatever stage they might be. Could be early in the stage, maybe haven't filed. We suspect these are going to be difficult to impossible. Well, impossible is probably the wrong word, but very difficult to win at the local level. And so for that reason, if we can get started earlier in the process, it could be even better. So at whatever stage you guys might be at, don't let, even if it's very early, don't let that stop you from contacting us if that's what you want to do. Because again, we know that we're not talking about a large number. So I've slowed down my intake on other types of cases. One, because my team can only handle so much, but at the same time, I expect that we'll get a few more of these. How many, obviously it's up to you guys, but at whatever stage you're at, go ahead and contact us if you'd like help with the case. You don't have to have been denied, but if you are and you're already well into the board, into the appellate process, that's fine too.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Dennis, you have a question? Dennis, go ahead and unmute yourself, please, so we can hear you. There we go. And you know what? If you can push your camera back a little bit further, we can see all of you. We've just got your shoulders and chin in that picture. At least that's what I'm saying. There we go. There's your handsome face. Go ahead.
My question is to Kerry. I want to thank you for what you're doing. And I just got your mail because I just got down to Florida. And obviously the mail is horrible. And I got paperwork that I have to sign, 6 forms, and then I can scan them back to you.
That's right. Let me add something to that. If you guys contact me, we're trying to, law firms, and I don't control all this, have fancy ways of doing things and probably have more papers to sign than you really need to. And there's a whole intake process. And I know some people have already been wrapped up in that intake process because this is kind of a special mission for us. I'm inviting everybody to contact me directly. I've worked it out with my team through some trial and error, as some of you may have experienced, and my apologies for that. My goal is to get you just the basic forms that we must have, not all the extra stuff that you would get through our normal intake process, to get you on board a little bit faster and a little bit simpler. And so if it gets to the point where I can't handle it, and through my staff, we may have to get we have a pretty large intake staff. We may have to get some of them involved just to help. But at this point, you guys send me stuff directly. Now, I apologize up front if sometimes I'm not as quick to respond. I am pulled lots of different directions, but nonetheless, I think that's probably there's Cadillac problems, I suppose. but this is very important to us. And do not hesitate to follow up with me on stuff if I don't get to it as quickly as you'd like. Don't hesitate to follow up with me for any reason, and if I'm not responding, if you like yelling at me, go ahead and yell at me. But because nothing is nothing's ever going to go perfectly. I sometimes have to make an appointment to go to the bathroom. But and I am doing things on my end to make it a little easier to take these things on. It takes a while.
We understand.
To clear, to even clear a spot off one's plate, sometimes it can take.
Well, I'll have them out to you today.
Okay. And you're right. You can email anything back to me. And for those of you that have my staff's email, you might want to share it with each other. Because especially Shannon on my staff. In fact, I should just go and give you her email. Her name is Shannon, SHANNON, and it's the same as mine at hillandponton.com. So it's just Shannon. So if you send something to me, if you have that email, CC her as well. She helps keep me honest, and I don't have to track everything on my own.
I will ask. I know it's very, very helpful for everybody to ask on their own individual cases, but from a time standpoint and for the benefit of everybody, would like to keep the questions more generalized and not on specific individual situations. So with that, I thank you for that. Kerry, thanks for that information. We will if we have any questions, I'm sure everybody's going to reach out. Kevin, you had a question. Good morning, aloha, and how's the weather in Hawaii?
Very, very warm. Hey, Jim, good morning. And Kerry, thank you so much for being here. And we talked a couple times about a month ago. And one of the problems that has kind of come up is I went before the board and I got granted, and I got an arthritis exam because the rating manual doesn't list IBM as a disease. So is there some way we can get that fixed for in the future when people do get rated, they do get the right type of exam to give them the right percent of benefits for IBM, which is similar to ALS?
Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. I had that same experience in another case. We can do what we can on something like that, but what we cannot do is control internally what goes on at VA on a case-by-case basis. And what I mean by that, say, we win an issue at the board, if it's the issue service connection, and that's all the board's going to do. They're going to grant service connection. It's going to come back to the regional office. They're the ones that's going to implement that board decision. They should get an examination first. They won't always. If there's enough evidence in the file to rate on, then fine. If there's not, they should get an examination. And I've seen another one where they gave orthopedic exams, and we had to, at that point, we can't control it because we can't see it in real time. The adjudicator's just sitting there doing their job, and next thing, when we get wind of it, you're on your way to an exam. And we might not even be able to tell sometimes exactly what kind of exam that is until you get to the exam. And so sometimes we're having to go back to VA to get those things fixed. And we were able to do it this time on that other case. That's something we would always, I think, be able to do, particularly if the wrong kind of exam led to the wrong rating. Which it did on another one. We were able to get that rectified. Now we're still working on some issues in that case. But the right exams did eventually get done. I have to chalk that up to, I guess I don't have to, but I will chalk that up to, we're just dealing with a disease that not a lot of people have ever heard of. And didn't realize they were asking for the wrong kind of exam. And when these things come back from the board, the people that are working on these right now are in what's called production. So their numbers are being watched. They're racing through these things. As Larry can tell you, that has its consequences. You know, that's not something we can control. But we can always get those things fixed in the aftermath. If we get enough of these where we're seeing grants come from the board and we have time to front load something in the file to try to prevent them from making a mistake up front, we will do that. The problem with that a lot of times is I'm not sure some of these folks working these cases can spell VA, much less read a whole paragraph. I mean, we just see mistakes that you just leave your head scratching. Just go, what the, you know, what's going
Kerry,
on?
what entity within the VA controls those diagnostic categories? And you know, no matter where we look, we cannot find IBM. The IBM is not mentioned anywhere in Title 38 in the VA, nowhere. So obviously, just as Kevin pointed out, you know, they go in for an IBM exam and they get examined for arthritis.
Yeah.
Who controls what department? If we wanted to take this on as a task and try to solicit their understanding, what department would that fall into within the VA?
All right, so it's going to fall under the Veterans Benefits Administration from a higher level. All right, you got three arms in VA. You got healthcare, right, benefits, and National Cemetery. Under benefits, you've got lots of offices, you know, in lots of business lines. And a business line would be voc rehab, insurance, compensation, pension. Those are all business lines. All right, we're dealing with compensation. So that's the business line that you want to seek for. So the controlling authority on a policy perspective is the policy staff in compensation service as part of the Veterans Benefits Administration. Unfortunately, through the past few years, that's been bifurcated to a large degree. They've taken, in fact, this happened when I was there. They took pension and moved it over to fiduciary and made pension and fiduciary service, which is still part of compensation and pension, but it's got its own director now. They took what was the appeals, which was also controlled policy-wise by compensation service and their policy staff, personnel-wise through the Office of Field Operations, two different things. They took that and peeled that off and made the Office of Administrative Review. That office now handles all appeals throughout the country, and they set policy for appeals. The problem there is you've got the Office of Administrative Review, you've got Compensation Service. Both are in charge of policy, except this one works on appeals, this one doesn't. And there's no way to separate those two, not in reality, because if you get one right, you're not going to end up in the other bucket. Yet they did separate them. So now you've got two business lines with two directors, with two staffs, almost two missions, but all doing the same thing. And that provides an opportunity internally to start headbutting. Or passing the buck, or saying, oh, it's their job, not my job. And it's frustrating to deal with some of that.
It definitely sounds
but compensation service create the initial proposed regulations to add a diagnostic code to the VA rating schedule.
Okay.
So, you know, and so you're really starting with the Undersecretary of Benefits. You wanted to go from the top person on down. His name is Josh Jacobs. And so that's where you'd start if you wanted to go internally in VA, and you'd go to the Undersecretary for Benefits. But his people beneath him would be the ones that would create that diagnostic code. We're running into the same thing with constricted bronchiolitis from the burn pits. That's now a presumptive condition after the PACT Act. There is no diagnostic code for it. They've known about it for 13 years now. I wrote a training guide in 2010 that laid out very clearly that there was no diagnostic code for constricted bronchiolitis. It was a signature condition that these guys are getting coming back from Iraq. Even DOD agreed with it. It was initially thought to be from a sulfur fire, which it was, but then they realized everybody exposed to burn pits was also getting it. And we've been working on that for over a decade. And now they're updating the respiratory rating schedule, right? And still don't have a diagnostic code for that in there. I've had 2 meetings with the undersecretary over that matter. So sometimes getting at what you're talking about is it can be difficult. So the rule is to rate a condition analogous, right? And you may have, if you haven't heard of that, it's rating by analogy. So when you encounter a disability that does not have its own diagnostic code, then you rate by analogy to a diagnostic code that's similar to it. The problem with IBM is not that there's no rating criteria for it. There's plenty of rating criteria for it. It's just not under its own code. So, for example, all of the muscles, all of the nerves, all of the joints, even though I know it's not a joint disease, they all have their own diagnostic code for rating disabilities based on their limitation of function, say of that muscle or that nerve, for paralysis of that nerve, regardless of what may be causing it. So there is a way to rate IBM perfectly fine, I think. There's just not a diagnostic code. My guess is the diagnostic code would say something like rate in accordance with residuals of the affected body part, something like that, because there are other diagnostic codes that it's too hard to have their own rating criteria. So that there's a diagnostic code for it, but then it says rate under its appropriate body part. Parkinson's disease is similar to that. Okay, it's got its own diagnostic code, but it doesn't really have its own criteria. All right, it says a minimum rating of 30%, and then rate the residuals under their own appropriate code. So if you've got paralysis of your legs, they're going to rate under a neurological code. It's going to be hyphenated. Parkinson's code will be the first code, and it'll be a dash, and then there'll be a code for that particular nerve of that lower extremity. And so that, like, the left leg would get its own rating. So there are ways to do that. But
okay,
say
thank you, Michelle. You have been waiting there for us. So if you would unmute your microphone, we'll all be able to hear you. There you go. Go ahead.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Jim, for putting this together, and for Kerry taking the time to help educate us on all of this and what you're doing. I have a weird question. I don't know. So I was diagnosed with polymyositis, and I'm noticing, I thought they had rated me on it to make it service connected, but it's not. What do I look in my records to show, or is there anything in records I need to look for when I try to do my claim to get it, if that makes sense?
Ooh, that's a pretty broad question.
Okay.
It's hard to answer without, it's hard to answer something like that without seeing the file.
Okay.
One logical place to start is, did you have any of these symptoms in the military? Did you go to their healthcare clinics in the military and report any problems that could have been the onset of something like this? Now, obviously, when we're talking years difference, that's going to be hard to show. But obviously, that would be the low-hanging fruit, because then you could show you had a symptom of this that started in the service, even though they might not have known it was a symptom of this initially. Other than that, when did it start in relation to service? If we're talking years, as we are in a lot of cases, can you show exposures that may have led to the condition? In other words, and if you weren't somewhere where there's known exposures, what was your MOS? Most people don't drive down that deeply. If you're a mechanic on an airplane or a vehicle, especially years ago, you were probably using things like straight solvents, very dangerous ones sometimes, to clean grease off things. Hell, they used to use benzene as a solvent by itself. So there's lots of things you could look at, but it's hard to put a finger on it without, having the actual file.
Okay. I'll contact you offline then.
Okay. All right.
Thank you.
Teresa, you had a question.
She does, but this is her husband, John David.
Oh,
I just have a comment and a question. There's no authority for a regulation unless the statute's permitted. So the statute has to have some nexus to the issue that's under the regulation. The regulation then Well, the statute will give the secretary, in this case, the VA, to write a regulation, but it has to be in the parameters of the statute.
It doesn't have to be. If it is, the secretary has no choice. So Congress creates a statute and says, hey, we're making a presumption of service connection for IBM. Secretary has no choice but to implement that. No choice whatsoever. But the secretary could do their own research, right? And come to the conclusion there's enough evidence for them to act on their own and use their own rulemaking authority and create a regulation. That's what happened in ALS. There is no statute mandating ALS. It is strictly through a regulation.
Well, that's what I'm getting at is I agree that they don't have to mention in the statute anything about IBM or ALS, but there has to be something in the statute that can be interpreted to permit a regulation that's under the authority of the secretary to work in that area or provide benefits in that area.
If I understand what I think you're saying, and I might not, so I apologize. There is a statute expressly that provides the secretary his rulemaking authority.
Yeah.
There is, yeah. So there is a statute that gives them authority to create their own rules when they can support them. So that statute does exist.
I understand that it's the rulemaking authority there has to be something under the purview of the VA. It doesn't have to be expressed in the statute, but it must be something in a program. And if it's not, then it's not something under the authority for the secretary. What I'm getting at is that no regulation is going to be upheld by a court unless there is a nexus to the statute. And I think I gotta ask Kerry if you have a citation to that regulation. I'd be happy to look at it. I've had a career in the federal government on rulemaking, and can see what they've got in there. And there might be language that we can hang our if we get the hook. To say that there's the breadth of authority here that's been given by Congress, and the interpretation in a regulation presumes that it's valid. That might be a basis upon which we can make an argument. If it's good for one particular area that's similar to IBM, we can put it forward to them to say, this is what you put in the preamble to the regulation. The statute says this. We think this program should be instituted in native regulation.
I don't know that I'm completely following you there. What I know is for the regulation for ALS, there's no statute mandating it.
I'm not saying that. There must be something that's being interpreted in that statute to permit a regulation like that.
Not specific to a disease, no.
No,
no.
not suggesting that would have to be the case, but there's probably some language that gives broad discretion to the secretary, and they've tucked it into that to say that that's what is the authority for the regulation that is there right now.
I have to go back to what I said before. I think that's the rulemaking statute. I think it's 501. I'll get you that statute. I don't want to put it off my head. I think it's 501, but there's a statute in Title 38 that specifically governs the secretary's own rulemaking authority. It's not rulemaking on a specific subject. It just gives them that broad authority.
I understand. The broad authority is still within the purview of what Congress has given to the secretary.
Right.
And that's where I'm probing, because that might be the area where we could find something that probably in the preamble for that regulation that we could put a hook into and try to apply it to IBM.
Oh, right. Maybe I'm just not understanding, but no, I agree with you. That's why I was telling some folks, if you're going to Congress with this, that's fine, but don't limit yourself to Congress. If you could convince the Secretary of VA that this is worth rulemaking and supported by evidence, the Secretary can do that all on his own.
Right.
Kerry, is the Title 38 law that we're looking at, the section 3.318, is that considered is under what category is that if you're familiar with it, it was the one that specifies the presumptive service connection for ALS. Is that a rule or is that a law?
Well, I would call it both. All right, it's a regulation,
That's the law.
and that's a law. All right, it's also I say rulemaking. It's a rule and a regulation. Same thing. I'm using
Right.
using
I
it
understand. Yeah.
interchangeably. So yeah, it's a regulation written by VA that is law. It's binding on VA. It's just not mandated by Congress to be there.
Well, there's got to be something that was interpreted from the statute to get that regulation into effect. I'd be happy to look into that.
Hey, if you can find something like that for me, I'd be happy to look at it as well. Please send it
Yeah,
my way. But there's
if you do-
nothing in
if-
this. There's nothing in a statute that suggests to the secretary or otherwise tells them or whatever to make a regulation for ALS. It's just their rulemaking authority. They had the evidence through lots of federal research, and it was supported at the time, and so the secretary crafted that regulation out of whole cloth through his rulemaking authority. But there's no statute that I'm aware of. If I'm wrong, please send it to me, and I'll readily admit I was mistaken.
That's what I'm getting at. If
Yeah.
the regulation, Jim, if you have a citation for that, I'd be looking at it, and that'll answer the preamble to that. Will link up the statute to the regulation.
If you come upon anything that is meaningful there, though, if you would copy me on that or just send it to me and I'll forward it to Kerry, and we'll see if we can get the machete out and cut through all the high weeds.
It's been a while since I've looked at it, but I think it does refer to the statute of their general rulemaking authority as their authority to come out with that regulation. I think that's the only statute it refers to is their rulemaking authority statute. But again, I could be wrong there. It's been a while since I read it.
I think on Title 38 there was a footnote there that was under the authority of 501. So I think there's, and again I'm going by a rusty memory, but
I'm almost certain 501 is their rulemaking authority.
yeah, I saw that down there. There's a lot of those little footnotes there, that they don't make it easy. That's for
Yes,
damn
it
sure.
is. Rules and 501 is rules and regulations. The secretary has the authority to prescribe all rules and regulations which are necessary or appropriate to carry out the laws administered by the department and are consistent with those laws, including and a bunch of stuff.
Kerry, let me ask this. We have just concluded a pretty extensive effort in soliciting Congress, both houses and Senate committees, to change 38. As it stands right now, that Title 38 that specifies ALS as presumptive service connection, solely from military service. We have asked Congress to amend that section 3.318. Did we approach that correctly in asking them to amend that? Are they able to do that, or should we have gone to the VA?
Well, you approached it correct. You approached it in my opinion, one of the correct methods. Now Congress couldn't reach down inside VA and amend 3.318 since it's a regulation that belongs to the secretary. Congress could still pass a law that says you will add IBM as a presumptive in the same manner as you did ALS.
So it was not necessarily a futile effort.
No, not at all. And what VA could, say if Congress did that, what VA would probably turn around and do, at least I would think for simplicity's sake, is specify IBM in the same regulation that lists ALS.
That's what we're hoping for. That is exactly what we're hoping for.
Yeah.
I will send you the complete letter that we sent there that specifies exactly what you just said.
Okay. And I know we're at an hour, but I only answered a few questions. I'd love to answer any more if anybody's got any. I can hold on here for another 10 minutes or so.
Okay, go ahead. Daniel, you had a question.
Yes, thank you. And thank you, Kerry, for helping us out here. I'll try to make it quick as I can. In 68, 69, I was stationed in Croc Island on air crew that flew over Nam. And when I got back, I was designated 60% because of Agent Orange for ischemic heart disease. Then later on, in I guess it was around 2010, I ended up having my first diagnosis of the IBM. I put into the VA for service connection. I used the wording for Agent Orange, and I guess that was my mistake, but does it look promising with that? Because they know I had service connection because I was in, 29 years.
Mm-hmm. The fact that you already conceded exposed, all right, is a big help in the case. Would they grant it? Obviously they're not going to grant it presumptive to Agent Orange exposure because it's not presumptive to Agent Orange exposure. They would have to grant it on a direct basis. Here's a big problem in VA. This is my opinion. The VA gets in this groupthink mentality when it comes to presumptions, and I haven't yet seen the PACT Act make a huge difference in this, or I've seen it in some cases make a difference. And that groupthink is, if you're not claiming something that's presumptive, then it can't be granted on that theory of exposure. That's one incorrect assumption. Colon cancer is a good one. We have a lot of Vietnam vets with colon cancer. Colon cancer is not on the list of presumptive. VA always denies it, saying it's not on the list of presumptives. Fine, we're not claiming it to be presumptive. We're claiming it direct service connection, which you still need those three elements: the event, the diagnosis, and the link between the two. The presumption removes the need for that link between the two. That is all it does. If you can show the exposure, an actual link, and the event, you still get service connection on a direct basis. Case law solid that supports all of that. So just because it's not presumptive doesn't mean it can't be granted, but most of your employees are going to get locked on to, oh, it's not presumptive, I can't grant it. That is incorrect. A lot of your examiners look at it the same way. When they ask for an opinion, you will see the examiners come back and all kinds of wild things, but a lot of them will say, well, VA hasn't made that a presumptive, therefore it's less likely than not related to this exposure. Well, if VA had made the presumptive, they wouldn't be asking for the opinion in the first place. These examiners don't understand it either. So they get in this groupthink mentality that, if it's not presumptive, I can't grant it. That's slowly, very, very slowly being chipped away by portions of the PACT Act that says they have to get a combined effects medical opinion based on all exposures of someone. I was arguing that stuff decades ago because that's simply an informed opinion. VA's always been on the hook to get an informed opinion. Now that you've got a statute that's kind of spelling out what you have to get that informed opinion, even though it was always really a requirement. But you're going to run into that groupthink mentality when it comes to presumptives, especially when you mention something like Agent Orange to your run-of-the-mill decision makers. They're just not going to get it. Can that case be won? Absolutely. All right, it absolutely can be won. But that's just going to be some of the pitfalls that you're going to run into when trying to get it service connected, and you'll notice it. You'll notice it in the decisions and how they word it. You can tell that they're misapplying the law almost every time.
Kerry, we know that. Are there any other questions for Kerry? I know he's on tight schedule here, and was ready to. Is there one final question that we can ask Kerry? Then it looks like the questions are over. We're going to continue the. Oh, Kevin, you wanted to? There,
Yeah,
I see you waving.
Yeah, I just wanted Kerry to touch on the SMC, how to launch that in a claim. SMC is special monthly compensation, which probably applies to all IBMers with the R1 rating.
So yeah, that's a good question. So SMC is, just so everyone knows, because you'll hear it from VA incorrectly, that SMC is not its own individual claim in a lot of claim patterns, although it can be its own individual claim. And what I mean by that is, if you're 100% and you've gotten worse and you need assistance from somebody, you want to file for, say, aid and attendance, there's an actual form for the evaluation. It's not an actual application form. It's more of a medical form. It's called 2680. And that's the only form that could be even remotely considered something for SMC. Okay. And I say this because what we run into a lot is, we'll get somebody service connected. We'll come back and say, this is, we're appealing for an increased rating. This person warrants SMCL or SMC, whatever it may be. It could be R1, could be aid and attendance. And they will, let's just say they grant it. They'll grant it from that, well, what happens more often is they'll reject the claim, saying we haven't filed for SMC, right? Or if they don't reject it, they'll grant it from the date of that initial request for SMC, as if that's a standalone request. It's not. When you're rating a case and you see that SMC is warranted, that becomes an issue in that case automatically. In other words, if you got rated at 50% when you should have been rated at 100%, we can appeal for a higher rating. Okay. It's the same thing with SMC. You get rated 50%, 100%, SMCS, SMCL, and we think it should be higher, we can appeal for a higher rating, just in the same manner. All right. But what you will see from VA sometimes is, depending on how you go about appealing it, you'll get this confused deer in the headlights look, if you could picture it, from them going, well, you haven't filed for SMC. It's not a standalone claim. It's part of the underlying claim when the disability presents itself to warrant the SMC. So I say that because if VA will get away in a lot of circumstances and messing up someone's effective date, they'll grant SMC, but they'll think, you just raised SMC for the first time. The case itself raises SMC when the disability presents itself in such a manner as to warrant the SMC. So it's just a rating issue like anything else. It's not its own separate claim that's got some secret handshake on how to file for it. So keep that in mind for one. But once you're into it, and if you want a class on SMC, that's probably a different thing altogether. You'll want to watch out for, though. A lot of these cases will get you granted aid and attendance, and it's a lot of people that have been granted have at least gotten that much. But VA will think, well, we did our job right. We granted the maximum benefit. Aid and attendance, regular aid and attendance. There's multiple levels of aid and attendance. And so that may not, if you're in a wheelchair and can't use your arms, you've got two things going on there that could help you get a much higher rate than just regular aid and attendance. Not that that's a low rate, that's a good rate to have. You get that rate for having loss of use of the legs. Okay. Aid and attendance and loss of use of the legs comes out about the same rate, SMCL, right? But you had loss of use of your hands too. That's its own independent SMC rate that's combined with the L for the legs, and that will help get you up to R1. There may be other, there could be other things going on other than just the extremities that could be used for that. But SMC is complicated once you get way up there. I've got a lot of ways to simplify it, but there's a lot of VA employees that don't understand it. And the higher you go up, the harder it is to get them to agree that you need more, because we're talking R1, R2 is over $9,000 a month. So they're at that rate, they're not gonna they're gonna scrutinize it, and rightfully or wrongfully, but it's going to be scrutinized. But when there's a clear loss of use of all four extremities, then that should help us get to R1 in most every case, because then it becomes not so complicated. If there's no question loss of use of all four extremities, that in a short version, it gets you to O, SMCO. There's no doubt that you got both hands, both legs. That's two rates between L and N equals O. It's simply a mathematical computation. If you're at O and you need aid and attendance, that puts you to R1. That's the simplest straight route to R1 right there.
Kerry, perhaps another we can arrange another visit from you, and you could, because this is a whole different subject rather than the claims and the appeals process. The rating process is something that, as you just explained, is pretty complicated. And if you would be willing to do so, we would love to have you come back and explain that maybe in detail. So because it is complicated, and my head's spinning right now trying to figure all that out, and to lay that out in more simplified terms or with perhaps some visual aids would be very helpful. If you're willing to do that, we would love to have you back.
I would be happy to do that. Yeah.
Wonderful. Kerry, we cannot thank you enough for your time, your expertise, your talents, your magic wand that we know you carry
magic.
Yeah, we that you carry it somewhere.
It's usually a baseball bat.
Sometimes that's what's required. But the information that you've shared with us today has been incredibly helpful. It's, they just don't make the process easy, but we've got your emails and your email addresses, and I will send to you the information that we discussed, the letter that we have sent to Congress, as well as the clinical study that ties the environmental exposures to that shared protein that affects both ALS and IBM.
Okay.
I will send those to you. I think you'll find that quite interesting, and we'll get that out to you today.
Feel free to share my emails so everybody has my contact info. If you like,
you have my email, I believe.
I do. Right.
Okay. If you would just send, if you could just send that, just give me a quick text or email, and then I will disseminate it to everyone.
Okay. And so that before we get off, Larry, are you still on here?
Larry's here. Larry, go ahead and unmute Larry.
Okay.
There you go.
I'm here.
Larry, do I have permission to share kind of what happened in your case there?
Sure you do.
Okay, because I can't share that without your permission. So just and this is a good story. So we won Larry's case at the board in a very unusual fashion, in a very rewarding fashion, I have to say. And it went back to the regional office to get its rating, and so I was watching it because I tend to watch these things in the system as if I know they're going on, and I knew this one was, and obviously Larry's very disabled, and they come out with a rating. It was 0%, and it was the worst rating from a board grant I have seen in my life. In 25 years doing this, it was the worst.
0. 0%.
0%. The 2680, the aid and attendance form was one of the first things beneath the board decision. I went so high into the right. I looked up the contact information it was done by the St. Petersburg Regional Office, which is they're a decision review operations center, so they do appeals. That's what a DROC stands for. And I went to their director, their service center manager, their team coach that was in charge of that raider, and that raider. And I was not happy. I didn't throw any curse words around, but man, I was close.
You got out the magic wand baseball bat.
That was definitely the bat. That might have been the sniper rifle. And I didn't get a response. My hope was to get them to pull that thing back before it was authorized and issued to Larry. And I cast the net wide enough to do so. And that's not something I would do in a lot of cases, because I'd wear out a welcome mat, or they would just stop listening to me. But when the house is on fire, I can sometimes do something like that. And sure enough, the next morning they did authorize that decision and mailed it out. Larry got his copy. And so that morning, I sent the same message with some added to it to the Office of Administrative Review, the guy I was telling you is in charge of all the appeals in the country, and to the guy in charge of that office. And I told him, and I knew who he was. I was going to continue to escalate it because it basically took like 2 minutes to rate that case. So if they can spend that little amount of time on such an important case, then I can give you a day and no more than a day before I go to the undersecretary. So sure enough, by the end of the day, I hadn't had a response, so I went to the undersecretary. And I did get a response from him at 9:30 at night, and he contacted the guy in charge of the appeals, and the next day that rating was fixed. Now we're still bickering about the level of SMC, but for the most part, it was fixed. And when I thanked the undersecretary for his involvement, I told him, and I kind of had a feeling what would happen from this, but I wasn't sure. I was testing it out. I told them that this is a systemic problem that they have. In other words, we see that kind of stuff happen a lot. Larry's case was the extreme, but we see cases get underrated from board grants all the time, sometimes drastically so, or the effective date gotten wrong, or residuals missed. Say it's a Parkinson's case, a good example, and they missed all the extremities. You come back and file an appeal, and VA says, "Oh, we're rejecting your appeal because we didn't address the extremities on there. It's just a specific AMA issue." And our response is, "That's the point. You didn't address the extremities on there when you were supposed to have." So there's all these things that occur downstream. Once an appeal has been there for years and years, sometimes it finally gets granted, and then you screw it up even worse than it's ever been screwed up from that point forward. Good Lord, can we get it right from that point? Was basically the message. And they asked for a meeting. The undersecretary, my boss, and I flew up to DC the following week and had a meeting, a sit-down face-to-face meeting with the undersecretary, and the guy in charge of all the appeals in the country, and we did a sweep of all of our decisions and come out and strictly doing the ones on service connection grants from the board. What happened downstream? Our accuracy rate was about 44% for them. They did their own numbers and come out to an 88% accuracy rate, which is lower than their standard claims, which it's much lower than that. But so my point to all this is we were able to get something rolling. I hope, I don't know yet, on getting some of these things improved downstream once VA does service connect the stuff. And in Larry's case was a good vehicle for that. And so I just wanted to let you guys know. And Larry, I appreciate you letting me tell that story. And whether it's going to have long-term effects on other cases, we don't know yet. I'm skeptical. I've been in a lot of those meetings and I never see anything happen. But the fact that the undersecretary is willing to invite us up and listen, that's a good sign. So we'll see. I just wanted to share that with everyone.
Kerry, let me ask this. Was this something that was specific to IBM or the general rating
This was the
fiasco?
general rating. This was the general rating fiasco. It's just Larry's case was the most extreme example of that rating fiasco that I had seen. So his case was a very good one to take to that level.
Wow.
Yeah. So
Well, thank you. It's an amazing story, but it is very disturbing.
Yeah, and it's important that you know that you could run into something like that, but there's also ways to fix it. And sometimes in doing that, good things can come of it. It usually is just fixing that case and we move on. That's what happens.
How about we throw this out real quickly before you have to leave? That is, why don't we just do this as a class action? And you can just do everybody at once.
That decision is above my head.
Okay. Kerry, again,
well,
thank you.
I think you'd have trouble. I think you'd have trouble because you have no law to attack yet under a class action. I think, but I could be wrong on that. That's my gut reaction.
We'll work one day at a time, and there's a lot of days ahead of us. I fear before all of this is remedied. But again, Kerry, we know you've got to go, and again, thank you for sharing this time with us. This has been very informative. I will be in contact with you. You'll be in contact with me. We'll exchange some things that I think you're going to find very helpful, and we'll proceed accordingly.
Okay. All right.
Thank you.
Thanks,
We're
Kerry.
going to continue. We're going to continue the meeting because Kerry does have other things he has to tend to.
All right.
But
just let me know when you want me to come back. I'll be happy to do that. And
that'd be great.
And you guys, if you want to send me your info, if you want us to handle your case, there's something I need at least your name and address and claim number. We fill out the power of attorney form for you, and so that way all you have to do is sign it, send it back. But you don't have to do all that in first contact, but there'll be stuff I'd be asking for, just very, very basic stuff that we can put on the power of attorney form and get that to you, where all you have to do is sign it. Yeah, kind of make that easy for everybody. So, but yeah, if you want our help on that, just reach out my email and we'll go from there.
Very good. All right, Kerry. Thank you so much.
All right, guys. All right, you take care and have a good rest of your meeting.
Thank you.
Bye.
So we're going to continue the meeting here, and I want to bring everybody up to date on the letters that were sent out to Congress. And the last batch of letters was mailed yesterday. They went out, and I know a lot of you had, and upon my request, I asked for some personal stories that we could share with Congress, but we weren't able to get those into the letter because of the time constraints on us as Congress was reconvening. We had all of August where the Congress was in recess, and it was something where the time constraints prohibited us from getting those stories. And as some of you submitted some very moving stories, and we're not going to eliminate those. We may just postpone sharing those if needed. But we've sent copies of the letters out to every member of the Senate Committee on Veterans Affairs and the House Committee on Veterans Affairs. Some of them have been personally hand-delivered. Augie set up the first meeting with his Congressman, Andrew Clyde, in Georgia, and he delivered a copy of that letter to Andrew Clyde's staff in the office, in the district, despite the efforts of UPS to not deliver the package to Augie. But it was sort of an emergency thing, and I won't get into any more details. But when I found out what it cost to overnight Saturday delivery to Augie, I couldn't swallow for about 3 days. But they screwed it up and I got all my money back. So that was good. And Alicia, thank you immensely for your efforts. Alicia enlisted her family, cracked the whip, and had her mother, who was meeting with Senator Cassidy in Louisiana, to hand deliver his copy. And Alicia's mother met with Senator Cassidy and hand delivered that. And then he followed that up with another meeting with his legislative staff. So these are the efforts that were sort of above and beyond. Dick Burley managed to get to the office in Idaho and meet with his representatives, or the office of his representative, and delivered the letters to him personally. Marty Paulson. Marty drove 4 million miles to deliver the he's shaking his head no. Yeah, you did. But Marty's in Montana, and Montana is pretty wide open, as I say, the big skies, but he drove quite a distance to hand deliver this to John Tester, who is the chairman of the Senate Committee on Veterans Affairs. And there were others. Mike Bost, I called Congressman Bost's office. He is the chairman of the House Committee. I called the office when they were in recess, and I asked if he is going to be in district. And they said, yes, he was. I found out which office he would be in, and got the help of a very, very nice staffer there. And she told me, she said, just direct it to my attention. She said, and I will personally put it in his hands. So for all of you who made those efforts, there's not enough thanks out there. It was something that when you hand deliver something, it gives this personal note rather than, a personal component to our struggle. And I think that is very, very important. So for those of you who have taken that effort to make those personal deliveries, our thanks to you, very, very sincere thanks. Now that they're all mailed out, those that were hand delivered, that's great. There was actually I had to I asked my ex brother-in-law to I called him up down in Texas, and he delivered one to Keith Self, who was on the House Committee, and he went over and took it to the office of Congressman Self. So we've had help from a lot of people that many of you may not be aware of. And this is the kind of group effort that is going to push this thing forward. It may be slow, but it is a step that I think is so very important. Now that we've mailed these, let me just put it this way, and I'm not exaggerating, so help me, I am not exaggerating. When I mailed all of these to each member of the Senate Committee and the House Committee, the receipt that I got from the post office is literally 6 feet long. They just kept printing this thing out and out and out and out and out and out, because there was so many of them. And but we got them out, we got them delivered. And there's some other things that are happening. John Bozeman's, who's on the Senate Committee, Senator Bozeman's office has been aware of our efforts here for some time. But as so many of these government actions are, the delay has been monumental. And our contact in Arkansas, where John Bozeman is, the contact there was a Marine veteran that I have known now for quite some time. He and I become friends in our battle because we both got exposed to Agent Orange in Thailand. And Bill Rhodes has been invited to Congress to he was invited to the White House for the signing of the PACT Act. He was very instrumental in getting Senator Bozeman and John Tester to make some entries into the PACT Act. Bill has been my liaison, if you will, to Senator Bozeman's office. Bill called me up just a day or two ago and said, "Hey, I've got some good news." And he said, "Prepare yourself for a phone call from Senator Bozeman's office." So we will see if that occurs. I don't want to count my chickens, but apparently they apologized to Bill for taking so long to act on this. And they were sincere. They said, "Look, we're very sorry this has taken so long, but we want to move on this." So they had questions, and he shared with them my name and contact information, then called me and said, we have momentum in the right direction. So if any of these things materialize, the reports and the letters that went out had my name and my contact. I only provided my email address and my phone number. I did not provide my address with a zip code in it because, as you may be aware, that if they see the zip code on there that's not in their district, they'll send it to the representative that represents that zip code. I did not want that to happen because, to be quite honest with you, my congressman out here has hired a staff that shouldn't be allowed out of their house. They're unresponsive. I haven't received a phone call from them. Terry's laughing because he's got the same congressman that I do. He's out here in Grand Junction. But I've tried to get a hold of the staff. I can't tell you how many times, and I have never received a return phone call. I have never received a follow-up to a voicemail, and it is quite disappointing. I called our senators out here in Colorado. I left a voicemail to them in January of 2022. Just 19 months later, I just got an email from them that said, "Please fill out this form." And I filled out the form. And I just said, if you're going to take 19 months to respond to this form, don't waste my time. So we'll see what happens with that. But the ball is rolling, and I think it's going in a good direction. We've made a lot of progress. Each report went out in a bound with a report cover with a die cut window in the middle of the report that showed the senator or congressman's name and the committee. It was addressed individually to them. It was a formal report. The presentation really came out well. It's something that it's going to be difficult to overlook, rather than just one sheet of paper with, to whom it may concern. Within that report was the letter of explanation saying, what we wanted to do, and I will send this out to everybody here probably on Monday or Tuesday. But with that letter, the signatures of 40 veterans that signed this letter were attached to that and went to Congress. And I believe that is just an enormously helpful act on your part. And my thanks cannot be extended more greatly. By putting your signature on there, it's very easy to maybe disregard the signature of one individual. But it's got to be really purposeful if they ignore 40 signatures on this letter. We're all veterans, we're all disabled, and to have that letter signed by 40 disabled veterans, I think is going to be impactful. We have the letters both from Todd Cohen, Tom Lloyd. We have the Freedom of Information Act response that I got showing that there were 1,700 veterans within the health administration that had IBM. I included that, the epidemiology report, and a copy of Title 38 and our intent as to how we would like to have that Title 38 change are all included. So it came out to be a 10-page report, all individually bound, individually presented, and I think it is going to make a good presentation. So now we just have to sit back and wait. Since there was a few of us that had discussed that putting more than one contact in that letter may have fragmented the results on that. So the letter had my name and my email address, my phone number, and we'll wait to see if we get a response on it. I know that Dick, let's see, where's Dick? There you are, Dick. Dick visited his congressman's office, delivered a copy of that letter, an unbound copy of that letter to his congressman. And the staff that greeted him was very interested in this and said they were going to pursue this with the state a VSO organization. Dick, can you share with us what you were what you experienced?
The response was very positive, and the lady who was in charge of caseworking for the congressman indicated that not only would they go to the VSOs, but also to their congressional liaison for veterans issues, and that goes into the committee and subcommittees, as well as some other organizations. So she was off to send copies of that package off that day to individuals concerned. I am very interested in what Kerry said about notifying the secretary as well of the VA.
Yeah.
Because I think what may happen is some of these congressional and senatorial offices may call the secretary of the VA and say, hey, what's going on? And it would be a good thing if we didn't blindside them.
Indeed, indeed. Dick, again, thank you for your help doing that. I think that's the kind of help that can make a difference. So I wanted to share that with you. I will keep you all up to date. I will send each of you a copy of the full letter that we sent out. And again, just remember, each one was individually addressed to the members of the committees from both the House and the Senate. And I will send that out along with what other materials there that I know the clinical report was requested. You may see that this may be duplicated. If it is, I apologize, but I'll just send it out in bulk to everybody so you have it.
And Kerry Baker's email.
I wrote them both down. I will send both emails to everybody.
All right.
And yeah, give me a day or two to put all that together and we'll get that out. But so I'm going to stop the recording here.